sinner who's probably gonna sin again.
You know what?
Huh? What? What?
Sorry.
Oh! Be right back. I've been looking forward to this one. I first heard of Kendrick Lamar in early 2015. I was looking for new jazz, and I saw that the AV Club had listed the album You're Dead by Flying Lotus as one of the best albums of 2014. I did some research, and I saw that Herbie Hancock, Thundercat, Kamasi Washington were on this album. That was enough to sell it for me. It turns out that Steven Ellison, Flying Lotus, is the grandnephew of Alice Coltrane. So, of course, I checked it out. And it's a dense, heady, trippy experience with elements not just of jazz, but electronica, fusion, hip-hop. One of the best tracks on that album, Never Catch Me, has Kendrick Lamar on it.
I can see the darkness in me and it's quite amazing.
Then a year or two later, I was having a discussion with Mike Keneally, and we were talking about music, specifically the jazz, fusion, electronica overlap that had been emerging over the past few years. I mentioned how much I loved Flying Lotus's album, but also the Epic by Kamasi Washington and Thundercat's Tiny Desk Concert. Mike told me I needed to check out Kendrick Lamar. And not long after that, the album Damn won a Pulitzer Prize. Those two albums, Damn and To Pimp a Butterfly, they're lush, sprawling, very emotional. I felt like a definite change had come to hip-hop since I'd last paid any attention to it, if these albums were any indication. And what I'd like to do at this point, for those of you that haven't been exposed to this music, is to play a little of it for you. But I can't play too much. Not just because of copyright concerns, but because the sentiments that Kendrick expresses are a bit spicier than I feel I can comfortably share with just anyone. But being as quick as possible, check out the intro to the song for free. But that's just the music part of it. The words are the central focus, because that's the nature of the art form. The beats, the musical components, there was much less repetitiveness, much more attention to an integration with the emotional arc of the song, serving the really kind of inspired lyrics, right? At times, it's almost symphonic, maybe even operatic. And then Astrid started playing some of Untitled Unmastered for me during car trips, and I liked what I'd heard from that album as well. A good bit of what I've heard from Kendrick Lamar so far reminds me, if not directly, at least in terms of a lineage, it reminds me of spiritual jazz from the late 60s from artists like, Charlie Mingus, Gil Scott-Heron, Alice Coltrane. So, like I said, I'm looking forward to it. So, let's get started. What's good, kid?
Lord, forgive me. Lord, forgive me.
Good Kid, M.A.A.d City. When my dad asked me to do these videos with him, one of the biggest things he asked me to do when making these videos was to analyze kind of the production value, what I see as a music tech student, what I see as hopefully a future audio engineer, to kind of critique the production and the musicality of these albums. But what struck out to me the most about Good Kid, M.A.A.d City was kind of the unknown pop culture influences that it had. When you think of Kendrick Lamar, you think of To Pimp a Butterfly in terms of its influence on pop culture and society and politics. But going into this as someone who supposedly had never heard the album before, I knew the majority of the songs. Of course I knew M.A.A.d City, but things like Money Trees, Poetic Justice, Swimming Pools, these are all songs that have kind of permeated pop culture in such a way that I already know these songs like the back of my hand. So I found that very, very interesting.
I tried to get my brain to work backwards this time. That is, the first time I listened to this album, I did so with the lyrics in front of me, reading along, forcing myself to concentrate on the words first, which is backward from how I normally do it, but I suppose it's in line with how most people normally do it, because I'm a normal guy. Anyway, the experience of that first listen was like reading a short story, and a pretty good one at that. A story of a teenager growing up with friends who are into drinking, smoking, breaking into houses, girls, more girls, music. But all the while you get his inner monologue. I completely felt his peer pressure, understood his motivations. I felt his humanity. And one thing I noticed this first spin that really took me by surprise as being a really brilliant touch is the more violent and extreme the subject of the song, the more Kendrick's voice sounded nervous and unsure. His voice would crack and he'd start rushing his words, especially on the song m.A.A.d City. So it was only after I'd fully absorbed the story that I started making myself pay attention to the instrumental aspects of the music, which were, to my ears anyway, actually not as interesting as the other Kendrick Lamar albums I'd heard before. Interesting, but not as interesting. So there's definitely not saying that there's nothing here. There's some beautiful musical moments. The backing track to Good Kid, for example, which is probably my favorite song on the album, it'd make a beautiful soul jazz or R&B track. Check it out. Another interesting device that he uses on this album is that many of the songs are broken up into two discrete parts. The first part would introduce a scenario or a premise. Then there'd be a complete break, just a stop in the song with some dialogue, which introduces like a turning point. And when the song would resume, it would be a completely different sound and feel. The story would be a transition to the consequences of what was established in the first part. Very innovative. And it's there, I think I have to leave it for now. I'm starting to feel very out of my depth.
Sometimes I need to be alone. Don't kill my vibe. Don't kill my vibe.
In terms of production, it's Kendrick Lamar. There's really nothing to nitpick. The man's a genius. He won a Pulitzer, for God's sake. So I don't really have a lot to say in terms of production. His top tier rap album, like he always does. But yeah, what the biggest takeaway for me was his such a gigantic, such a gargantuan, titan influence that he has over not only the rap industry, but just pop culture.
There was a sentiment I heard the other day, expressed by Jesse Thorne, the head of the Maximum Fun podcast network. The thing he expressed was that a lot of folks want to see hip-hop as a form of poetry. His opinion was that doing so, making that comparison to say that rap is a form of poetry, is doing a disservice to hip-hop. So in other words, you shouldn't make that comparison. And the more I think about that, the more it makes sense to me. I mean, sure, there's a Venn diagram there. There's an overlap. Many of the same skills you need to write poetry might well apply to writing rap lyrics, but hip-hop is its own unique art form with different creative motivation and different constraints. You're trying to do different things. And I have to come back to the fact that as much as I know about music, I know a lot about a lot of different kinds of music, but I know next to nothing about this particular art form. I am very ignorant when it comes to hip hop. I think I am willing to say unequivocally right now that I like the music of Kendrick Lamar. Everything I've heard from him so far, without exception. But this album, Good Kid, M.A.A.d City, what it feels like to me is not as though I've just listened to an album. Rather, what it feels like emotionally to me after I'm done with the spin of this album is that I have just interacted with an important short story, literature, or maybe like an envelope pushing movie, like Kids or Elephant or The Virgin Suicides. Something that really gets you to confront something that is important but uncomfortable. Beyond that, though, I do not feel in the least bit qualified to make any other assertions about this music. Maybe I need to take lessons. Is there anyone out there willing to give me lessons in hip-hop theory? I'm 100% serious. This is a huge blind spot in my music knowledge. I've just recently learned enough to know that I don't know anything at all. So it seems like right now might be a good time to find a sensei. Leave me a message if you can help me out. I can give you like guitar lessons or theory lessons if you want in exchange. Meanwhile, for what it's worth, I like this album.
So, that's all I have.
Don't kill my vibe. I can feel your energy from 2 planets away. I got my drink, I got my music, I'd share it, but today I'm yelling, don't kill my vibe. Don't kill my vibe. Don't kill my vibe. Don't kill my vibe.